Northern France, June 5, 1944. 24 hours before D-Day. In a farmhouse attic outside Caen, a French resistance leader named Michel Dubois sat hunched over what appeared to be an ordinary leather suitcase. But this wasn't luggage. It was one of the most sophisticated portable radio transceivers ever created, disguised so perfectly that German search teams had examined it 3 times without recognizing what it was. At precisely 21:15 hours, Michel tuned to a specific frequency and waited. Through the static came a BBC broadcast, seemingly ordinary news and entertainment programming. But within the broadcast, hidden in what sounded like random personal messages, were coded signals that resistance networks across France had been anticipating for months. "The dice are on the table," the announcer said in French, reading what seemed like a nonsensical message among dozens of others. Michel's hand trembled as he wrote it down. This was it, the signal that Operation Overlord, the Allied invasion, would begin within 48 hours. He immediately began transmitting using the suitcase radio, tapping out Morse code on a miniature key hidden inside what looked like the case's leather lining. His message went to 6 other resistance cells within a 50-kilometer radius, each equipped with identical radios disguised as suitcases, briefcases, or wooden boxes. The message was simple: activate Plan Vert. All railway targets. Dawn tomorrow. Within hours, resistance fighters across Normandy began the largest coordinated sabotage campaign in history. Railway lines were cut, signal stations destroyed, German communication cables severed, fuel depots sabotaged, all synchronized through a network of hidden radios that the Germans knew existed but could never fully suppress. By the time Allied forces landed on the beaches at dawn on June 6th, German reinforcements attempting to reach the coast found their railway routes blocked, their communications disrupted, their logistics paralyzed. The resistance, coordinating through radios hidden in plain sight, had delivered a strategic blow that contributed directly to D-Day's success. This is the story of the British suitcase radio, the weapon that looked like luggage but functioned as the nervous system of European resistance, making possible the coordination and timing that turned isolated partisan groups into a unified fighting force. Let's go back to 1940. After France fell to Germany, British intelligence faced a critical challenge: how to communicate with resistance networks forming across occupied Europe. The Special Operations Executive was organizing partisan groups, coordinating sabotage operations, and gathering intelligence, but all of this required reliable, secure communication between London and occupied territories. Traditional methods were inadequate. Couriers carrying messages risked capture at checkpoints, and their information was days or weeks out of date by the time it arrived. Dead drops and brush passes worked for local communication, but couldn't coordinate activities across regions. Homing pigeons, used extensively in World War I, were too slow and unreliable for time-sensitive operations. Radio communication was the obvious solution, but presented enormous challenges. Commercial radio equipment was far too large to conceal or transport covertly. Military field radios were equally impractical. They were bulky, obviously military in appearance, and required vehicle mounting or multiple operators to transport. Possession of any radio transmitter was a death sentence in occupied territories. The Germans executed anyone caught with transmission equipment as a spy. What the SOE needed was revolutionary. A radio powerful enough to transmit from occupied France to receivers in England, compact enough to be concealed and carried by a single person, sophisticated enough to resist German direction-finding efforts, yet simple enough that minimally trained resistance members could operate it. Station 9, in collaboration with British telecommunications engineers and the signals intelligence specialists at Bletchley Park, developed what became known as the Type B Mark II, though it would be more famously remembered by its nickname, the suitcase radio or paraset. The achievement was remarkable. In 1940, most radio transmitters capable of the required range weighed over 50 pounds and required external power sources. Station 9's engineers created a complete transceiver system, transmitter, receiver, power supply, and antenna that fit inside a standard-sized suitcase weighing just 32 pounds, could be operated from battery or mains power, and transmitted clear signals across hundreds of miles. Creating a functional high-frequency radio transceiver compact enough to disguise as luggage required solving engineering challenges that seemed impossible with 1940s technology. Every component had to be miniaturized, optimized, and integrated into a package that looked innocuous to German searchers. The core transmitter used vacuum tube technology, the only option available before transistors. Miniature vacuum tubes, originally developed for hearing aids, were repurposed for radio transmission. These tubes generated the radio frequency signals that carried Morse code messages across hundreds of miles. The transmitter operated on frequencies between 3 and 16 MHz, allowing operators to select bands based on atmospheric conditions and time of day for optimal transmission. The receiver section shared some components with the transmitter in a clever dual-use design that saved space and weight. Operators could switch between transmit and receive modes using a simple toggle, listening for responses from London handlers or incoming instructions before transmitting their own messages. Power systems offered flexibility crucial for covert operations. The radio could operate from mains electrical power where available, useful in safe houses with electricity. Alternatively, a battery pack using 6-volt dry cell batteries provided portable power for field operations. A hand-cranked generator, stored separately but compatible with the radio, allowed operation even when batteries were depleted, though cranking generated noise that limited its use in sensitive situations. The antenna presented unique challenges. Effective transmission required antenna wire at least several meters long, creating visibility problems. Station 9 developed multiple antenna solutions. Collapsible wire antennas that could be strung temporarily in attics or between trees, antenna wire disguised as clothesline or electrical wiring, and in emergencies, the radio could use building electrical systems or water pipes as makeshift ground plane antenna. The disguise was critical to survival. The complete radio system fit inside a standard leather suitcase measuring approximately 45 centimeters by 35 centimeters by 15 centimeters, dimensions identical to ordinary luggage. The components were arranged to create realistic weight distribution, and the interior was designed so casual inspection would only reveal what appeared to be personal items. Clothing, toiletries, documents, with the radio components hidden beneath or within false compartments. Alternative disguises included wooden boxes labeled as toolkits, briefcases ostensibly containing business documents, and even modified gramophone cases where the radio appeared to be part of a record player mechanism. The key was creating something that looked completely ordinary, that a German soldier or Gestapo agent would glance at and dismiss as harmless civilian property. Security features built into the radio helped protect operators. Crystal-controlled frequency generation meant transmissions were harder to track than earlier variable frequency designs. Operators could change crystals to shift frequencies, making sustained direction-finding attempts more difficult. Transmission protocols emphasized brief, coded messages. Shorter transmissions reduced the time German direction-finding equipment had to locate the signal source. The technical manual for operators was itself a marvel of compact information design. A small booklet that fit inside the suitcase, printed on thin paper, containing all essential operating instructions, frequency tables, and basic troubleshooting procedures. In emergencies, the manual could be quickly destroyed, burned or dissolved in water using special water-soluble paper in later versions. Operating a suitcase radio effectively required extensive training that went far beyond simple technical knowledge. SOE schools across Britain taught agents not just how to transmit and receive, but how to survive as a clandestine radio operator in hostile territory. Technical training covered radio operation, maintenance, troubleshooting, and emergency repairs. Trainees learned to identify vacuum tubes by number, replace failed components using minimal tools, adjust frequency crystals, optimize antenna configurations for different environments, and work around equipment malfunctions that would occur in field conditions far from repair facilities. Morse code proficiency was essential. Every radio operator had to achieve minimum speeds of 12 words per minute receiving and sending, preferably higher. Beyond speed, operators developed distinctive fists, personal sending styles as recognizable as handwriting. London handlers learned to identify operators by their fist, providing authentication that the agent wasn't compromised or replaced by German impersonators. Security protocols emphasized survival. Operators learned to transmit from different locations on rotating schedules, never using the same site twice in succession. They practiced rapid setup and teardown, assembling the radio, transmitting the message, and disassembling everything in under 10 minutes. They trained to recognize signs of German direction-finding activity, vehicles with unusual antennas, patrol pattern changes, suspicious civilian behavior near transmission sites. The transmission schedules themselves were carefully orchestrated. Each operator had specific transmission windows, designated times when London would be listening for their signal. Missing a scheduled transmission triggered concern and investigation. Unauthorized transmissions outside scheduled windows were forbidden except for emergency traffic. Message coding added another security layer. Operators didn't transmit in plain language. Everything was encoded using cipher systems that changed regularly. The famous one-time pad cipher, theoretically unbreakable if used properly, protected the most sensitive communications. Operators memorized their call signs, authentication codes, and emergency destruction procedures. The psychological preparation was perhaps most challenging. Operators knew they were priority targets for German counterintelligence. The average life expectancy of a radio operator in occupied France was estimated at just 6 weeks. Captured operators faced torture and execution. Training included psychological conditioning to resist interrogation, though everyone understood that torture could break anyone eventually. The suitcase radio's deployment across occupied Europe created an invisible network that fundamentally changed resistance warfare. Hundreds of radios operated in France, Belgium, Holland, Denmark, Norway, and other occupied territories, creating a communication web that allowed London to coordinate partisan activities on an unprecedented scale. Daily life for a radio operator was defined by constant danger and meticulous routine. Operators lived undercover identities, posing as farmers, shopkeepers, or office workers, while secretly maintaining radio contact with London. They moved frequently, never staying in one location long enough for German direction-finding teams to locate them precisely. Transmission sites varied constantly. An operator might transmit from a farmhouse attic one day, a forest clearing the next, an abandoned factory on the third day. Each location required assessing antenna possibilities, escape routes, and sight lines for spotting approaching German patrols. The best operators developed networks of safe houses and sympathetic civilians who allowed brief radio use without asking questions. The Germans hunted radio operators relentlessly. Special Funkabwehr, or radio defense units, deployed across occupied territories, equipped with direction-finding equipment mounted in vehicles disguised as commercial trucks or repair vans. These units could triangulate a transmitter's location by taking bearings from multiple positions while the operator transmitted. The cat-and-mouse game was deadly serious. Operators learned to recognize Funkabwehr activity, vehicles that appeared repeatedly near transmission sites, suspicious civilians who asked too many questions, unusual traffic patterns that suggested surveillance. Smart operators aborted transmissions at the first sign of danger, sometimes abandoning equipment rather than risk capture. German countermeasures evolved throughout the war. They monitored all known resistance frequencies continuously, recording transmissions for cryptanalysis. They operated fake stations attempting to impersonate London handlers, hoping to trick operators into revealing information. They captured operators and forced them to continue transmitting under duress, trying to feed disinformation to London or identify other resistance members. London developed verification procedures to counter German deception. Operators included security checks in every transmission, specific sending errors that indicated they were transmitting freely. If the security check was missing or incorrect, handlers knew the operator was compromised. Some operators were captured and forced to transmit without knowing about the security check system, unwittingly revealing their capture to handlers who immediately ceased communication. The life expectancy statistics were grimly accurate. Many operators were caught, tortured for information, and executed. Others survived through exceptional skill, luck, and support from resistance networks that protected them. The survivors were the ones who maintained perfect operational security, never broke protocols, and possessed the instincts that warned them when danger was approaching. The suitcase radio network's ultimate test came during Operation Overlord. The Allied invasion of Normandy required unprecedented coordination between regular forces and resistance networks, and radio communication made that coordination possible. In the months before D-Day, radio traffic between London and French resistance increased dramatically. Operators transmitted intelligence about German troop movements, fortification construction, minefield locations, and defensive preparations. This intelligence, gathered by resistance members and transmitted via suitcase radios, contributed directly to invasion planning. The BBC broadcast system became the primary method for transmitting activation orders to resistance cells. Pre-arranged coded phrases broadcast during seemingly ordinary French language programs signaled specific actions. The dice on the table meant different things to different networks. Some interpreted it as triggering plan vert, railway sabotage, others as plan violet, communication cable cutting, still others as initiating guerrilla attacks on specific targets. Radio operators received these broadcast signals, then used their suitcase radios to relay orders to local resistance cells that didn't have radios. A single operator might coordinate activities across dozens of partisan groups, translating BBC signals into specific tactical instructions and confirming execution to London handlers. The night of June 5th, 6th saw unprecedented radio activity. Operators across northern France transmitted continuously, coordinating sabotage operations that struck hundreds of targets simultaneously. German Funk Abwehr units detected the surge in traffic and realized something major was imminent, but couldn't stop the coordinated attacks already in motion. The results were strategically significant. German railway reinforcement routes to Normandy were severed at critical junctions. The 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich, attempting to reach the invasion beaches from southern France, encountered systematic railway sabotage that turned a 2-day journey into a 2-week nightmare. Communication cables were cut, isolating German units from higher command. Fuel depots exploded. Supply convoys were ambushed at locations transmitted via radio by resistance spotters. Radio operators worked until exhaustion during this period, transmitting situation reports, requesting supply drops, coordinating follow-up attacks. Some operated continuously for 18 to 20 hours, sustained by adrenaline and understanding that their transmissions directly supported Allied soldiers landing on beaches hundreds of kilometers away. The German response was overwhelmed. Funk Abwehr units attempted to locate and capture radio operators during this surge of activity, but the sheer number of simultaneous transmissions from constantly changing locations made systematic suppression impossible. For every operator they caught, 3 more were transmitting from different locations. Despite revolutionary capabilities, suitcase radios had significant limitations that shaped their use and affected operator survival. Understanding these constraints is crucial for appreciating both the technology's achievements and its costs. The transmission range, while impressive for a portable device, was variable and unreliable. Atmospheric conditions dramatically affected radio propagation. Ionospheric disturbances could block transmissions completely, requiring operators to retry at different times or frequencies. Operators sometimes transmitted critical intelligence that never reached London due to propagation failure, with no way to confirm receipt. Battery life limited operational tempo. A full battery set provided approximately 4 to 6 hours of operation, sufficient for typical message traffic, but constraining during periods of intensive communication. Operators constantly manage power consumption, rationing battery capacity, and planning transmissions around recharge or replacement opportunities. The equipment was fragile, despite rugged construction. Vacuum tubes failed, requiring replacement with spares that weren't always available. Rough handling during transport or hasty escapes damaged components. Water infiltration from rain or damp storage conditions caused corrosion. Operators became skilled field technicians by necessity, repairing equipment with improvised tools and salvaged parts. The human cost was severe. The 6-week average survival estimate wasn't hyperbole. It reflected the brutal reality of operating against sophisticated German counterintelligence. The Gestapo and SD treated captured radio operators with extreme brutality, recognizing them as critical intelligence assets who could reveal entire networks under interrogation.
Torture was standard procedure. German interrogators knew that radio operators possessed valuable information, other operators' locations, safe house addresses, upcoming operations, cipher systems. The interrogation methods were designed to break resistance quickly, with little concern for the prisoner's survival afterward. Most captured operators were executed after interrogation, with some being sent to concentration camps where they were worked to death or murdered. The psychological toll on survivors was profound. Operators lived with constant fear of capture, fear of betraying comrades under torture, fear that every transmission might be the one when German direction finders located them. Post-war studies showed elevated rates of anxiety disorders, hypervigilance, and trust issues among surviving radio operators. Families of operators often didn't know what their loved ones were doing. SOE maintained strict operational security, telling families only that their relatives were doing important war work. Many operators died without their families ever learning the full truth of their sacrifice. Post-war, when operations were declassified, families finally understood what their husbands, sons, or daughters had done, and the extraordinary danger they'd faced. The suitcase radio's influence extended far beyond World War II, shaping communications technology and intelligence operations for decades. The engineering principles developed for the Type B Mark II influenced both military and civilian radio development. Post-war, the technology was rapidly declassified and transitioned to civilian applications. The miniaturization techniques developed for military radios accelerated the commercial development of portable radio equipment. Amateur radio operators benefited from vacuum tube innovations originally created for covert military use. The Cold War saw extensive development of clandestine radio systems building on World War II foundations. CIA, MI6, KGB, and other intelligence agencies created increasingly sophisticated concealed communications equipment. The transistor revolution of the 1950s and 60s enabled even smaller, more reliable designs that made World War II suitcase radios seem primitive by comparison. Modern special operations forces use satellite communications, encrypted digital transmissions, and miniaturized equipment that fits in pockets rather than suitcases. Yet the operational principles remain unchanged. Covert operators in hostile territory need reliable communication with distant controllers while avoiding enemy detection. The technology evolved, but the fundamental challenge that the suitcase radio addressed persists. Museums across Europe display suitcase radios as artifacts of resistance history. The Imperial War Museum in London, the Museum of the Resistance in Lyon, the Dutch Resistance Museum in Amsterdam all featured these radios prominently, recognizing their crucial role in liberation. Visitors who see them often express surprise at their compact size and the engineering sophistication hidden in what appears to be ordinary luggage. Veterans of resistance radio operations, in the few interviews they gave before passing away, consistently described their work as simultaneously terrifying and proud. They knew they were targets, understood the risks, and accepted them because the work was essential. Their transmissions saved lives, coordinated victories, and contributed tangibly to Allied success. The British suitcase radio never fired a shot. It didn't destroy tanks or sink ships. It killed no enemy soldiers directly. Yet it was among the most strategically important weapons deployed during World War II, enabling coordination and intelligence that shaped major operations, including D-Day itself.
The radio's power came from what it enabled: resistance networks that could act in concert rather than isolation, intelligence that reached decision-makers when it mattered, coordination that turned scattered partisan groups into effective irregular forces. Without the suitcase radio, resistance would have remained local, reactive, strategically insignificant. With it, resistance became a force multiplier that degraded German capability across occupied Europe. Station 9's engineers created something remarkable: a sophisticated radio system disguised so perfectly that it could hide in plain sight, carried by ordinary-looking people, transmitting messages that coordinated extraordinary actions. The engineering achievement was significant, but the human achievement was greater. Operators who risked everything to keep transmitting, knowing that capture meant torture and death. The price was steep. Hundreds of radio operators died in the line of duty, captured, tortured, executed. Their names are largely forgotten except in specialized historical archives and on resistance memorials scattered across Europe. They don't have the fame of fighter pilots or infantry heroes, but their contribution was no less significant. So why did this hidden British radio let resistance fighters coordinate D-Day attacks? Because communication is the foundation of coordinated action, and Station 9 created a communication tool that could survive in hostile territory. Because engineers solved seemingly impossible technical challenges to create portable, reliable, concealable radios. Because hundreds of brave operators used those radios despite knowing the probable cost. The suitcase radio was an invisible weapon. Invisible because it looked harmless, invisible because its effects were seen not in explosions but in coordinated actions across hundreds of kilometers. Invisible because the operators who used it worked in shadows and died in obscurity. But invisible doesn't mean ineffective. On June 6, 1944, when Allied soldiers stormed Normandy beaches and found German reinforcements delayed, communications disrupted, and logistics paralyzed by coordinated resistance attacks, that was the suitcase radio's victory. Hidden in attics and cellars across France, looking like ordinary luggage, those radios were the invisible weapon that helped win the most important day of the war. From hidden radios to flame-throwing backpacks to umbrella weapons, World War II weapons reveals the ingenious technologies that won the war in unexpected ways. Subscribe now for more incredible stories of innovation, courage, and the weapons that changed history from the shadows.